Good evening or afternoon. Once again, we're at the time of the year where I'm not sure whether it's evening or afternoon anymore. But, welcome. It's very good to see you. Some new faces. Thank you for joining us. Allegra sent you. Oh, well, good for her. And it's so good to have you here. Wonderful. Yes. So we have a sit beginning at 6:30, and so between now and then, we usually just I'm open to questions about meditation practice, and we just talk about that sort of thing for a while. So please, any questions that you have, that anyone has.
John, I have a question, even though I can't see you.
Can't see you either. Oh, there you are. Yes. Okay. Now I can see you.
Maybe you could speak just a little bit about. I was reading a text by a Buddhist monk about Lojong practice, and the text said something about if you're in so much pain or if you're so mentally afflicted that you can't meditate, you can still use those kinds of heightened emotions to bring on the direct perception of emptiness. And I just wonder what you think about that, or
Well, I would agree that you can, but that would require a fairly advanced degree of ability to keep your mind settled on the experience of the pain, and to investigate it, to allow that kind of insight to arise. It is the case that pain is a sensation that is unpleasant, but it is also the case that it is the mind's reaction to the pain which is causing the vast majority of the suffering that we experience. And so, to put that another way, we experience, or we see, we observe this quantity of what we call pain. And that pain is empty of a self-nature of being the way it appears to be from its own side, independently of the projection of the mind. So if you can recognize that and have the clarity and the insight to recognize that it is the reaction of your mind that is causing this to be the suffering that it is, and observe that, which actually, pain is a really effective way to do that, because you'll have a moment where you realize that and you let go of your resistance and the pain is less, and then you can observe your mind resisting once more, and the suffering increases, and you can see you can see the momentary nature of whatever is appearing, and you can see the dynamic that exists in terms of the mind's reaction and the sensation that is the initial source of this. And at some point, that can just crystallize into a really clear understanding that it's not just the suffering associated with the sensation of pain, but it's everything that is being produced in this way. That's an insight into emptiness. The special experience that you're referring to, though, this is when your mind stops doing that. And so it takes more than just insight into the fact that your mind is doing this. Although it's the insight into the fact of what's happening that arises out of directly seeing it happen moment by moment, that is very powerful and very transforming, and it can make it much easier for you to deal with the pain. But you have to have a sufficiently clear insight into the fact that the self that you believe you are, that is experiencing the pain and therefore suffering through the resistance to it, is just as much a projection as the suffering is. That insight has to be equally clear. As long as you don't have that insight into the emptiness of the self that's driving the whole process, the process is not very likely to stop. It's not very likely to be interrupted. So you have to have at least as clear an insight into the emptiness of self as you do the emptiness of the pain or the suffering that the mind is generating. And you also have to have sufficiently powerful equanimity that you can just simply observe this. Basically what would happen in that circumstance is you're observing the sensation that is the pain, and you're observing the mind's reaction to it, that is suffering. And as the insight becomes clear, and that's combined with such an equanimity that there is no further resistance, there is no, in the moment when the pain diminishes, there's no grasping after that. And in the moment when the pain intensifies, there's no resisting that. You just are completely open to allowing it to flow. And that creates the conditions by which, at some point, the mind, the conscious process, the whole process is repeated over and over again, moment by moment by moment. There's the sensation and the feeling, the vedana, the desire, the pleasant unpleasantness of it, and that gives rise to the craving, and then the craving gives rise to that reification that makes it all real. And this happens over and over and over again. So in a single moment, the mind can grasp the sensation, experience the quality of unpleasantness, and then at the moment that the craving is about to arise, the mind, through the combined power of the equanimity and the understanding, can turn away from that. Basically, the mind stops, the world stops, and you see things as they really are. That you see that, the words you use where you have a direct perception of emptiness, is that the word that you use? What you have is a perception of things as they are, completely empty of the mind's projection. Empty because in this moment the mind has ceased to construct a world and a self and the suffering that goes along with it. It's ceased in that construction, and it's in that moment of cessation of the construction that you can see. This is a manner of speaking to say that you see emptiness, because emptiness is, it makes it sound as though emptiness is a thing, and it's like, oh, look at the emptiness over there, But it's not. It's the absence of the construction of the mind, because that's what everything is empty of anyway. So you can experience that as a result of pain. Suffering is very well known as a vehicle to awakening. Both physical and mental suffering can be. And so it definitely can and does happen. The essential ingredients to cultivate are the equanimity, which is equanimity. Do you know what I mean by that? Some people think equanimity means experiencing something as neither painful or pleasant, but it's not. It's just accepting it without any resistance and without any grasping. You're just completely accepting of what it is. The mind does not react to it. So if you cultivate equanimity and combine that with mindful observation, which allows you to penetrate into the nature of what the mind's doing, that's creating this. This is really no different than any other practice that leads to awakening. Requires the same things to happen. But pain can be the vehicle for that. Is that what you were thinking of or getting at and asking a question? Yeah. I know you have a lot of pain. And I know I've talked to you about meditating on the pain. And there's many different degrees of understanding that will unfold as you continue to meditate on the pain. The nature of pain, the nature of sensation, the momentariness of that which is actually rising and passing away that you perceive as body and circumstances that are painful. And then there is the mind's reaction to it. And are you familiar with the links of dependent origination? Yeah, that's what I was just describing to you. So that's what you want to. That's what you want to have the direct experience of. You want to be able to see exactly what your mind is doing. And here we have sort of the same principle that works in all of the different practices that we do. When we practice mindful awareness of observing, for example, when we become impatient or angry, the mindful awareness that is applied to that observation, allows an understanding to penetrate deeply within our mind. It creates a new kind of imprint amongst the mental formations that alters them. It's a completely new kind of karmic seed arises as a result of the mindful observation of what's really taking place when we're engaged in anger or desire or any of these other sorts of deluded mental states that are creating our problems. Right? So this is the same thing, observing the process of what's actually taking place, paying enough attention to it that you actually can see it happen, in something that's so intense as the suffering that's generated in response to a painful sensation. If you can observe that clearly enough so that the understanding of what's really going on penetrates deeply into the mind, into the mental formations that we call the mind, then at some point what's going to happen is that's going to all come together and the mind's going to say, let's not do this anymore. And so just for a brief period of time, and that will be enough to start with, that brief period of time when everything stops, and because it has stopped, you see the true nature of what's there, what we describe as emptiness, or nirvana, which means a cessation of craving. But it actually refers to what's experienced once because you're breaking the link in dependent origination between the arising of the feeling and the craving, which tends to immediately follow after it. When you sever that link, then all the things that would have happened in the subsequent moments stop, and you're just right there with the reality that's always been behind it all. So it's very worthwhile practicing with that in mind. Practicing to see more and more clearly the process of dependent origination as it creates the circumstances that the self finds itself in. Okay.
Last time you said something that took me by surprise. And I think you said that samsara and nirvana are the same thing. Did I hear that correctly?
That's one way of speaking of them, is that they are the same thing. It is not the case that samsara is one thing and nirvana is something else. There is, we can use the word that the Buddha did, suchness. Mm-hmm. Okay, suchness experienced in one way is samsara. Suchness experienced in another way is nirvana. Now, these words that we use, if we go to where they come from, samsara actually is literally referring to the cycle of rebirth and redeath, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. And so, and when we analyze that from the point of view of where that came from, the early Indian philosophers and ascetics and so forth who examined that and said, "Oh, this is not a good thing. We need liberation from this." But you see, you look at it a little more closely, and it's not just that when you die, you're going to be reborn and have to die again, and have to die again. This happens every morning. You wake up and you experience the suffering that makes up a day's living. Each moment this occurs. That it is, and this is how the Buddha expressed it, as the first of the Noble Truths, is that all life is permeated by this dukkha, this unsatisfactoriness, this imperfectness, which in its more extreme forms, which are not that uncommon, is just plain suffering. So that's the samsara part of it. Now, the Buddha also, as the second Noble Truth, pointed out that when you examine carefully, you discover that the cause for this dukkha, the reason that this dukkha permeates human existence, is because of craving, constant arising of craving. And the third truth is that with the cessation of craving, there is the cessation of dukkha. And nirvana is the word that refers to that. So basically the first truth is describing samsara, and the third truth is describing nirvana. The fourth truth is the path that connects the two. But you see, what has changed when someone has gone from samsara to nirvana? There's been an internal transformation in the mind of the individual. So they haven't gone from here to there.
Yeah.
Thank you. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. We have a few minutes more. Yes?
Oh, well, I'm visiting. I'm on vacation. A man showed up in my door today looking for this place, and
You what?
a man showed up at my friend's door today looking for this place.
Oh.
And I practiced meditation. I was like, wow, okay, well, I'll go check it out too.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so I was just wondering what this is about, and what Vipassana, is that the main kind of style like you do here?
Sure, let me explain that. Actually, we haven't really talked that much about meditation in this period. We're talking more about Buddhist Dharma.
Yeah.
Right? The particular meditation technique that I teach, it is it is a vipassana, but most Americans, when they use the word vipassana, are referring to some variant of the method developed by Mahasi Sayadaw a little over 100 years ago, which involves observing the rise and fall of the abdomen and noting whatever happens to appear, which is one form of vipassana. Vipassana, the word itself, means insight, and that method's called vipassana simply because it is one of the practices that if you do it will yield insight. But in exactly the same way what I was describing a few minutes ago in meditation on pain, it will lead to insight as well, so that also makes it a vipassana practice. And what I teach is samatha vipassana, which is a combination of developing powerful concentration and mindful awareness, and at the same time acquiring insights. And so it doesn't involve noting, although there's different points in the practice where certain kinds of noting can be useful, but it involves primarily training the mind in stability of attention, and at the same time very powerful mindful awareness. So we meditate on the sensations that are produced as the breath occurs, as the air moves in and out of the nose, preferably on the sensations that occur in that vicinity where the air enters and leaves. So we use those sensations as the meditation object, and our practice is to try to train ourselves, first of all, to remain continuously aware of those sensations, overcome the tendency to forget what we're doing, and have our mind wander from one thing to another before we realize and bring it back. So the first thing we try to do is just achieve continuity of attention. Then, secondly, as we become more and more successful in that, we realize that while we're attending to the breath, we're also aware of many other things at the same time. And sometimes the sensations of the breath are the primary focus of the attention, but sometimes they slip into the periphery and something else takes its place. So this is sort of the next step beyond getting over forgetting and mind wandering, is getting over having those other thoughts and sensations that are distractions from the meditation object displace the meditation object, even though you don't lose awareness of the meditation object. So when you get some skill in keeping that in the center of your attention, then the other part of it is overcoming dullness. The gross dullness is the sleepiness that inevitably, as soon as you start to develop a certain degree of concentration and stillness of mind, you will go through a period where there's sleepiness. And that's pretty obviously something that's undesirable, but something's a little more difficult for people to recognize and appreciate the importance of, is overcoming subtle dullness. Because once you get over the tendency to drift off into sleep as a result of focusing your attention, there is the loss of the clarity and the intensity of the awareness. And very central, very crucial to this practice is maintaining a very high level of conscious awareness of whatever it is that you placed your attention on. And over time, this becomes more and more powerfully developed. So it becomes a much higher degree of mindful awareness than we ordinarily experience in daily life, and certainly than you do when you begin to practice. And so this is where it, as a practice properly done, it differentiates from what happens in some practices which are concerned solely with developing the power of concentration. Because what happens with them is when this subtle dullness develops and the meditation object loses its clarity, this subtle dullness of the mind makes it very easy to stay one-pointedly on the meditation object. And so the person has a very pleasant, very relaxing meditation, but it's a dead end. It doesn't go anywhere. The only way that insight and understanding can develop is that if your ability to focus your attention with stability on whatever you choose is combined with the ability to investigate what you're observing with a a very, very high level of clarity. And that's what brings about the understanding. And so that's, in essence, the practice. Once a person's concentration reaches the point that it is relatively effortless, then they enjoy wonderful things like what's called physical pliancy, which means that you can sit for very long periods of time, hours at a time, without your body becoming uncomfortable, and that the body is pervaded with a pleasant sensation, and the mind is pervaded with a sense of joy. And as one becomes familiar with that joy, it becomes less of a distraction, and there develops a very deep tranquility and equanimity. So the goal of this practice is to come, and that's what samatha refers to. The goal of this practice is to come to this place where you've cultivated samatha. Wherever you direct your attention, that's where it stays until you choose to move it. And your mind is completely open, alert, clear, and you vividly perceive whatever you're looking at, so that you have this power of, this tremendous power of the mind for investigation of reality. This is combined with a mind that is in a state of joy, tranquility, and equanimity, so that you see you have exactly the things you need. When I was talking earlier about what's the conditions that are necessary to have experience of awakening, to have the mind stop and the world stop so that you can see things as they really are in awakening. So necessary conditions for that, in addition to concentration and a very powerful mindful awareness, are a joyful mind, a tranquil mind, and a mind that has equanimity to accept whatever it observes. Those are 5 of the 7 factors of enlightenment, as they're called. The other 2 are investigation and energy. When you have those 5, then you start seriously investigating what on earth is this thing that's happening that I call my life. And as you investigate it with energy, then you have all 7 factors of enlightenment present, and this is what allows the experience of awakening to occur. These are the necessary conditions. So this practice is about developing those 5. When you have those 5, that's samatha. And vipassana is insight. All the way along the line of developing samatha, you will be gaining insight into the nature of the mind, and insights of various kinds into the nature of the human experience. So a lot, by the time you get to the last stage, you've already done a lot of the work. You're fairly close. Does that answer the question? Yeah. That's probably the shortest summary I've ever given of this practice. But I think it's probably, the more often you hear it, the better that you understand it, So I think it's a benefit in my describing it at every opportunity that arises. I'm not sure if somebody's, I don't know how familiar you are with these ideas, but somebody who's not very familiar with these ideas first encounters them, they get like a concentrated dose like that. I don't know how easy it is to assimilate, but but I was just speaking as much for everyone else's benefit as yours, so I hope it helped you.
Yes.
Well, let's begin our sitting practice. Thank you. Okay, please take a seat. So I hope someone has some good questions for me tonight. Yes?
John, you were talking before the meditation whole process. And you were talking about once you develop the ability to focus or concentrate, I think, on the breath, then the next step is to be noticing what else is going on while you're still holding your concentration. Am I understanding what you were saying?
Well, it involves noticing what else is going on, but if we look at the sequence of development of skills, which is what I was reviewing there. The first skill that you need to accomplish, and it should take priority. I mean, you'll develop other skills together with it, but it should take priority over anything else, and that is getting over forgetting and mind wandering. The forgetting and the mind wandering.
Your microphone went off.
Oh. Is,
There it is.
okay, so, I mean, that's the experience that everybody has when they start to meditate. They forget the meditation object, their mind wanders for a while, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Oh, yes. And that happens over and over again. And until a person can sit down and for the entire period of their sit, not cease to be aware of the meditation object, that should be their primary objective. But they are going to experience more and more often, longer and longer periods where the meditation object is in their awareness. And what is going to be obvious is that it's never the only thing. Your mind's filled with all kinds of other things that you're aware of simultaneously. And some people haven't understood that, and they feel, like there's something wrong if their mind isn't empty of everything but the meditation object. Eventually, we'll come to that place, but you're not there right away. It takes a while to get there, and if you start trying to make that happen before you're ready to, and before you've accomplished the other things, then what you'll actually do is greatly slow down the progress of development of the skill. So that first skill is getting over the forgetting and the mind wandering. But then, every single instance when your mind has not wandered, you're still with the meditation object, there's two possibilities. One is that the center of your focus of attention is the meditation object, and the other things you're aware of are kind of in the periphery. Or you're still aware of the meditation object, but it's kind of off to the side over here, and you're really thinking about something else, or your mind keeps dwelling on the pain in your knee or something else like that. So the appropriate practice when that's the case is that you want to, as soon as you recognize that the meditation object has moved away from being the central focus, and or even that the central focus is being shared by something else, you want to refocus your attention on the meditation object. And that's a skill too. At first, it just keeps slipping off, and it just keeps slipping off, and it just keeps slipping off. But after a while, the skill develops in keeping that as the central focus of your attention. Okay, so that's what I was referring to there, is these sort of two levels of skill development. But there are all these other things present in your mind. So you have made significant progress in your ability to concentrate when, even though you're aware of other sounds, and even though that little voice in your head just doesn't quite shut up, and thoughts pop into your mind of this and that, when you are able to keep them from taking your attention away from the meditation object. But this is also a great stage for learning all kinds of things, for developing right view, as a matter of fact, of what the nature of our existence is. It is a series of conscious experiences in each of which there is some particular thing that is arising as a focus of attention. And it's also an opportunity to come to understand clearly the meaning of the Buddha's teaching that what the individual consists of are these 5 constituent elements of sensation, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Because, in the whole course of training the mind to stay with one thing, you have over and over again the opportunity to recognize the truth of that. That these are the things that are present, and they just recur over and over again, and they arise and they pass away, and one replaces the other, and so on and so forth. But as you continue along, there comes a point where, you have a situation where you're continuously aware of the meditation object, and it's always the primary object of your awareness. But there is this ongoing awareness of other thoughts and bodily sensations and sounds and so forth that is sharing your awareness. So you're not really single-pointed, right? And as a matter of fact, the sort of scope of your awareness expands and contracts, and sometimes you're aware of more of this other stuff, even though the focal point is still a meditation object. Your awareness of it is more diffuse because you're taking in a lot of other stuff at the same time. And it's really clear the difference when you really come in and you focus very sharply, and the vividness of your awareness is just right there. So with continued practice, the next major skill level that you develop in terms of concentration and awareness is it is a single-pointedness with a particular quality of exclusive focus. And what we mean there is that all of those other things just get farther and farther away until you're hardly aware of them at all. So when that happens, you're sitting, and if you're using the sensations of the breath as a meditation object, by that time, not only will your mind be quiet, but so will your body. So your breathing will be very, very shallow and very subtle, but your mind will be focused, and you'll be aware of every part of the sensations of the breath, your mind not moving. And there'll be certain sounds that you are aware of, but not the constant awareness of all kinds of sounds. It's just every now and then there'll be a sound that is particularly loud or particularly unusual, and you'll be aware of it, but your mind won't go to it. It'll arise and it'll disappear, but it won't really disturb your focus. Thoughts will come, but a thought will come and it'll be like this little whisper that you just ignore and it goes away. And so that's what we call single-pointed focus, exclusive, single-pointedness or exclusive focus. When you have that, then you're very skilled at concentration. And the next stage is to become an adept. What that means is, in order to sustain this, the situation I just described, you have to be constantly vigilant. Because any one of those little whispering thoughts could, if you don't notice that it's there and make sure that there isn't any drifting if your focus takes place. Or when there's a sound, and that might trigger a thought process. Or it might cause you, if a phone rings, for example. You notice how there's the mind waiting for the next ring. So you have to be constantly vigilant and ready to make a correction if the mind starts to drift. There's another aspect of this I didn't discuss at all, which is dullness. or dullness starts to develop. And that constant vigilance actually produces a subtle agitation of the mind. But at some point, it's no longer necessary. At some point in the training, this sustaining of attention becomes effortless. And it's very wonderful when that happens. Now you don't need this to be constantly online. The mind enters into a new depth of calmness. And we could say that you're not just skilled in meditation, you're now an adept. Your mind, you place it somewhere, it just stays there. And associated with this is the physical pliancy. This is called mental pliancy, by the way. The technical term to describe this is mental pliancy. It means your mind does whatever you intend it to do. It is compliant. In addition to that, it's also malleable and wieldy. Something's malleable, you can shape it and direct it. It's wieldy, you can move it about. When your mind is like this, you can do both of those two things too. You can engage in it. You no longer have to practice single-pointed concentration. You can now observe the arising and passing away of one thing after another, and every single thing, even though your mind's moving from one thing to another, it still retains that same quality of complete focus. Even though I'm only on this for a moment, I'm totally on it, and then it goes to the next, and it retains that power of mindful awareness and that quality of focus. That's the quality that we describe as being wieldy. You can direct your attention here and explore that. You can direct your attention there and investigate that. And this moving about does not disrupt the quality of your concentration and your mindful awareness. That's the wieldiness. Malleableness is that you can reshape the way that you're observing. You can, for example, your mind is trained to observe the sensations of your breath. You can bring your conscious awareness a step back so that you're observing the mind, observing the breath. Or you can drop the breath entirely and just open the mind up and make it space-like and just be aware of anything that arises and passes away without clinging to any of it, without following any of it. This is a quality of a mind that is malleable. So it's mental pliancy with a mind that's malleable and wieldy. It's a wonderful thing. Even better yet, as if that didn't make it nice enough. You've overcome 99% of all of the frustrations and difficulties associated with any kind of meditation practice, but it's accompanied by physical pleasure and a feeling of joy, which matures into tranquility and equanimity. So these are the stages through which your practice can develop through. And my experience and my working hypothesis in terms of my teaching, and by the way, I can't claim that it goes back thousands of years, I didn't invent it, but is that where you get off track is if you try to be single-pointed and have exclusive focus before you've developed the continuity of awareness. You get in your own way, you create expectations and frustrations and disappointments, and you're not able to proceed. If you go about it in a stepwise and systematic way, then the initial steps are the most challenging and take the most time. But once you get past them, then it just begins to really accelerate on its own, and the practice takes off. So, let's give you anything else that you'd like to?
Take one.
I just find that sometimes in meditation, those later steps that you're describing happen, like this really deep quietness, and it feels good, and it physically does feel good. It's really this really cool state that you can't create, but you can find or be in. But then other times it'll just be like totally back to stage one.
That's right. Yes.
Totally yap mind.
Yeah, and that's. I'm so glad you mentioned it. It's a very important point. Number one is that you're going to move back and forth in this. things happen in your life, you're really agitated, you're going to be at stage 1, whereas maybe last week you were way into these deep, wonderful states. The other thing too, though, that I really want to point out is that it's developing the skills and the consistency. So even though you may experience profound state of calm and joy, if you can't create the conditions for that consistently, don't chase after that. You're not ready to. That's the mistake. Keep creating that is the result of a specific set of conditions being present, and they can occur and will occur from time to time spontaneously. Even somebody who's never meditated before, they'll sit down and meditate for an hour and have a wonderful experience, and then, weeks afterwards they can't reproduce it. And to the degree that you cling to that, something like that is wonderful because it gives you a taste. It's like, you're no longer taking it completely on faith, right? Because you've had an experience yourself. But beyond that, the problem is that you keep grasping at, you want that, But you've got to let go of that, and what you've got to do is put your effort into, if your problem is forgetting, then what you want to work on is remembering. And you don't want to be saving your happiness and satisfaction for when you experience a profound state of calm. You want to have that satisfaction and happiness every time you remember to go back to the meditation object. That's you want to have it. You want to be really pleased with yourself just because you discovered your mind was wandering and it hadn't even been a whole 15 minutes yet. Right? Because that's the kind of positive reinforcement that is going to bring you to the next stage. So we have to be very careful when we have the positive experiences, when we experience some of these more advanced, when we have a meditation session that partakes of these more advanced stages than where we're really at, is to not get caught up in thinking, well, that's what I should always have. Because you're working towards the point where that is what you always have. So that's really an important thing to always keep in mind. Yeah. Don't get attached. Wherever you are, you've been having, for weeks you've been having these wonderful meditations, lots of joy and profound stillness, and then today you've got monkey mind. Well, that's what you do. You just forget all about the last few weeks and you practice where you are today.
Yeah, like all you can do is come back, you can't do anything else.
That's
At least that's what it seems like.
Yeah. Sometimes, and sometimes it's hard to accept that. It's important. Yeah.
Yeah, normally with my meditation practice, I concentrate on the breath in the belly, but since the Richard Shankman weekend, I've experimented a few times, including tonight, with concentrating on the breath at the nose. And it's an extremely different experience.
Yes.
And so this question came up, well, how do I know which to do? With the breath in the belly, I find that my concentration is worse. And a lot of negative mind states tend to come up. But it seems to me useful that they come up, I notice them, and I begin to release them. Not fully yet, but releasing is happening. So even though this is an unpleasant experience, it feels very useful. With the nose, it's like completely different. I'm not having very many negative mind states at all. My concentration is not perfect, but it's quite a bit better, and I'm calm and peaceful. And I noticed a thought come up this evening of almost like I'm wasting time. I'm just enjoying myself. And so naturally I was like, wait a second, catch that thought, don't go too far with that thought, because I don't know. It does feel like I'm wasting time, I'm just enjoying myself, but I don't trust that to be the truth, that I'm wasting time and that I'm just enjoying myself. But I see that I don't know what's true about this.
Well, what you I can, with a lot of confidence, say that if you continue to experiment in this way with using the breath at the nose, it won't always be that way. And as a matter of fact, people who've never done meditation with anything except the breath at the nose, they have negative mental states and memories and past traumas and things like that come to mind too. It's just what happens, the way the difference happens to be manifesting right now in you. There are certain things, certain differences between the breath and the rise and fall of the abdomen that probably contribute to this, but they're worth being aware of. The breath at the nose it's subtler. The variety of distinct sensations that you can become aware of is much greater. So it is conducive to a much more powerful state of concentration more readily. And so probably what's happening is you've been training your mind to concentrate for quite a while on the fairly coarse sensation of the rise and fall, and now you've given this mind that's been working towards concentration for a long time a subtler object that is easier for it to, and so it goes for it, and it's having a wonderful time. You say you're enjoying. Well, your mind is enjoying the experience and the benefits of concentrated focus and calmness. But to the degree that there are agitating psychological factors at the subconscious level below the surface that still need to be resolved after the honeymoon period with the new object is over with, they'll start to come up again too. The advantages of the breath at the nose are largely to do with, this is tactilely much more sensitive area, and the movement of air that's producing the sensation is also much subtler, and when the breath becomes very quiet, it requires a very highly developed mindful awareness to even be able to detect the breath. But if you have succeeded in developing powerful mindful awareness, then you have this paradoxical situation where your breath is so fine that you're hardly breathing at all, but the sensations are so intense you can barely stand them. Any of you have that experience and know what I'm talking about?
Really slow. It's like 2 breaths a minute or something.
Very, very slow, but sometimes very, very fine and very shallow.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes even though it's so fine and shallow, it's become so sensitive that you might have this question: how can I stand to breathe all the time? It's so. But it's just the difference in. So this is the quality of the mind at the real. It's also a much smaller area, and so it has certain qualities that make it quite useful for developing concentration and single-pointedness. But you can do all the same thing with the rise and fall of the abdomen as well. I think most of the difference that you're experiencing between these two as meditation objects, you're experiencing the real difference, but it's a reflection of the fact that your mind has been trying to remain focused on a coarse object, and now all of a sudden it has a very refined one. So my recommendation to you would be to continue to experiment. I would say let go of all those worries about whether you're wasting your time or just because you're finding it enjoyable. There's nothing wrong with enjoying it. Enjoy it while it lasts. But it's you. In terms of the long-term objective of training your mind in both power of awareness and stability of attention, just continue to work with this and see where it takes you. And at any point that it seems appropriate, go back to the abdomen if you'd like to. And most definitely, if you're going to do a retreat like the one I believe you're planning to do in June, follow the instructions for that particular method. In a way, it's like having a convertible sports car and a big SUV. And which one am I going to drive? Well, sort of depends on the mood you're in and what you're trying to accomplish in the moment. But they'll both get you there. Other questions? One thing that I can suggest to those of you who are still dealing with the problem of forgetting is you might try during the rest of your day when you're out meditating, those circumstances that are conducive, to be aware of the in and out breath, even while you're doing something else or other things are going on around you. Just try as often as you can throughout the day to just be aware of the sensations of the breath. Same thing when you're in bed going to sleep at night and when you're waking up in the morning. Just as often as possible, just keep bringing the attention back to being aware of that sensation and make it a habit. Of course, it's hard to be aware of the sensations of your breath while you're talking to somebody. And if you're driving your car, you can be aware of the sensation of the breath, but that's definitely going to be in the background, right? And it's not going to be in the foreground of your awareness. But just you can practice cultivating continuity of awareness under all kinds of circumstances, and do that. For those of you who maybe don't have a problem with continuity anymore, or not very often, but there's that still the mind sort of slipping off, and you'll discover that even though you've been aware of the breath, you're really thinking of something else too. You might also extend your practice outside of the sitting sessions specifically to that. Now, definitely not when you're doing something like driving a car, but there are a lot of times if you're waiting in line at a grocery store, or waiting for your lunch to be served in a restaurant, or waiting for the photocopier, or that's just what immediately comes to mind. But there are many opportunities during the day when you could have the sensation of the breath be the focal point of your awareness, and still be aware of other things around you enough to respond appropriately when the cashier is ready to take you, for example. Or even if you're driving, when you stop at a traffic light, you can be primarily aware of the sensations of the breath while you're waiting for the light to change. You won't miss the light, or if you do, the car behind you will let you know. So I think it is a process of training. It's just repetition of the same thing over and over again until it becomes natural and automatic. So the more often you do it, the more opportunities that you see to come up to do it, then the more quickly you will master that particular aspect of the skill, of the training.
I have a question.
Okay. Let's Pam ask a question first.
Oh, okay.
The in-breath has a distinctly different
character for me than the out breath, and the accompanying mental state has a very different quality to it as well. So that's been very interesting and helpful to notice. At first, months ago, when I was doing this, the in-breath had a kind of sharpness to it, a clarity to it, a real physicality to it. But the out-breath was at first difficult to even detect the sensations of it. But then I started to notice, like even the heartbeat in right here, but it's a very different kind of quality. It's subtle. It's there, but it isn't there. But it's very much there. But it has a different, and forgetting or dullness seems to be able to grab me on the out breath. The in breath, you can be very present and crystal clear, and in a matter as quickly as an out breath, I begin to fade. I mean, I still deal with this. Some days it's not a problem at all.
Okay.
Other days it's like that. Is there anything you can say about this?
Well, first of all, I want to say that this is this kind of awareness and investigation, and I describe it as engaging with the sensations of the breath instead of just sort of passively, there it is again, there it is again, but noticing things about it, noticing how it changes, noticing the relationship between the mental states. The changes are so subtle that they change from in-breath to out-breath. That's very good. That's excellent. That's exactly what you want to be doing. Now, still something will capture you and carry you away. And I'll give you some tools to do the same kind of thing you're already doing, breath, that will help with that. Okay? Now, if you forget the meditation object and your mind has wandered for any length of time, it's probably gone. This is what the word wandering refers to, is it was first this, which triggered that, which then triggered something else, and that triggered something else. And so, it would be silly to try to trace it back to what originally made you forget the meditation object, because too many things have happened in between. But when it's just a brief lapse, very often whatever it is that's in your awareness that you were thinking about, that's the very same thing that took you away from the meditation object. And so you can adopt an attitude of just noticing what it is, not analyzing it, but the analogy that I use is you got abducted by it. So look your abductor in the face, maybe you'll recognize it next time, before it comes. You can carry this to another step usefully, although don't create too much busyness in your mind. But if you become very familiar with the hindrances, you can label the distraction that carried you away according to whether it was to do with sense desire or ill will or procrastination or worry or doubt. Most of them will have a label of being sense desire, occasionally ill will if you've had some disagreeable thing that's happened to you recently and it's in your mind. But and the sense desire will have to do with those things that seem really important to us. And so when I say you notice the thought that carried you away, and after a few noticings, it's obvious that, it's the same one or two or three thoughts over and over again that keep carrying you away. And so then when you're back and you're with the breath, then you can start watching for those thoughts arising and being more on guard against them specifically. And another thing along this line, and once again, don't let it lead to making your mind busy, but if you have a sort of clarity and engagement, and you can do this in a natural flowing way. The thoughts that carry you away from the meditation object, and this is not just the ones that cause you to forget the meditation object, this is also the ones that just displace the meditation object, push it off to the side while you're aware of them. They kind of fall into three different categories. There's the ones that ambush you. They're the ones that just, bam, all of a sudden they're there. Where did that come from? You know, you didn't even see it coming. Not too much you can do about those. There's the sneaky ones. You know they're there, and they just kind of gradually get closer and closer until next thing you know, here's a sensation of my breath, and here's this other, and they're just right there together. And a moment longer, and the breath would be over there, and this something, right? That's what I mean by they kind of sneak up on you. The third kind, they're seductive. They're oh so attractive, and you feel your mind being drawn to them. It's okay, and you keep having to come back, but you'll feel that this is something that your mind would really like to engage in, this particular thought process or this particular worry or whatever it is. You're nodding your head. You know? So they kind of tend to fall into these three different categories. So practicing mindful awareness while developing concentration is noticing these kinds of things, and it helps to speed the process along.
May I ask another quick question? Because I'm having a problem with this. This that we would call the third A, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, but it continues. It is so seductive to me, because when I close my eyes and I focus my attention here, it is so strong and so clear. It's like the room, the world, everything comes into focus, and it is so clear. And it's so, and I can just feel my whole body just totally let go. Even the muscles of my face let go. I mean, the tension drains, and everything is clear. And I want to stay there. It's so seductive.
Have you tried staying there?
Yeah, a lot. Is that a meditation technique? Is that a valid thing? I mean, I'm wondering if one
you can use absolutely anything in the world as a meditation object. Okay, it's completely valid. Try it and see. You see what you remember. What you want to do is not just enjoy a really good meditation, but you want to bring your mind to a place where you have a very high level of awareness. So make sure you have that. Make sure there's not dullness arising as part of this. And now examine this in terms of why is it that it's so easy to stay with this compared to something else? Because where you'd like to get to be is no matter what you choose to direct your mind towards, that's where your mind goes, and it stays. You know. And so what you've got is something here that's very easy to focus on. And so investigate that in terms of, well, how can you use this positively to train your mind? And what can you learn from it? It's always what you can learn from it. In the definition of the word for samadhi, for concentration, is samadhi, and it means a bringing together of the mind. If we look at the Sanskrit roots. And a distinction is made between ordinary concentration and sama samadhi, right samadhi. And ordinary concentration is if something is interesting enough, or pleasurable enough, or dangerous enough, it's easy to concentrate on. Okay? So it's just the natural behavior of the mind in response to something that has those qualities, which are actually triggering a powerful reaction in terms of desire. Okay? Whereas the sama samadhi that we're trying to cultivate is one that is not dependent upon the qualities of the object. Okay? All right. So now you might tend to think, well, okay, so because this is so attractive and because I enjoy it so much, and so it's obviously an object of desire, and I have desire and craving for the meditation I enjoy when I take it, that maybe I should leave it alone. But what I would say is, no, just don't explore it, investigate it, learn from it. Go to it with the attitude of, oh, this is how samadhi occurs in the presence of pleasure, desire, and satisfaction, and investigate it. It's only a problem if the desire wins, and you'd rather sit here enjoying the pleasant experience of this meditation.
Well, actually, it's for me, working with it, it's been a wonderful learning tool because there's such clarity, and then I can see it shift. Mm-hmm. It shifts in a blink of an eye, but I can see the shift. When it shifts, I can detect it. Mm-hmm. Very closely in an instant. I can see it and then bring it back. Mm-hmm. And I could not put into words exactly what that shift is, or how it seems less clear, but it's very, very subtle but very, very real, and I can detect it easier here mm-hmm. than at my nose. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, it's it's been a very interesting exploration, but I don't also want to do anything that is, or don't want to spend a lot of time doing something that isn't particularly productive. But
exactly.
I think it may be, at least for now, productive to explore this.
Yeah, I think it is. And going back and forth and saying, okay, this is the experience I have with this. Let me go back to those and see if I can replicate that, or see if I can see what the difference is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yes. Okay, yes, thank you.
But you're doing very well. You're doing the right things. You have the right attitude of investigation and exploration. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you to say more about seductive thoughts, because I have a real. That happens to me a lot, where my mind goes off into fantasy, and over the years I've been able to catch it more and more often. But what seems to be happening more recently is I'll catch myself about to go off into fantasy, and I'll stop myself, and then it's almost as if the fantasy or something says no, and I go off into fantasy anyway. I stop myself and still can't stop myself, and it gets very frustrating sometimes. And yet I'm sort of discovering a whole sense myself of, but who said I wanted to meditate? Like there's this voice that I never said I wanted this. She said she wanted this. Like I'm arguing with myself about it. So is this just something to explore and work with as best I can?
Oh yeah, and to learn from. I mean, you've already expressed wonderfully an important lesson and insight, is that there is no one single person. There's no one single mind. There's this whole illusion of me. There's a whole lot of mental processes, and they have their own agendas. And it's very interesting whenever we find ourselves with two of these mental processes with different agendas, and they're there right in front of us, struggling with each other, because it allows us to become aware. And of course, they're not the only ones, too. There's all these others, but yeah, that's good. Let that take you as far as it will. There is no single entity that you can put the label I on. You can conveniently refer to the whole mess as I. and you can work with it, piece by piece and in its totality. But the more clearly that you can recognize that there's no one part of this that deserves this label of the self or the one who wills or the one that's in control or so forth. Yeah.
I was thinking about the question about trusting your mind, because a lot of times I'll get the feeling like, oh yeah, it's very trustworthy, like the direction to go with a certain mental state or to decide to do a certain thing or something. It seems really trustworthy, but then there's other times I'm getting caught in like realizing like, whoa, that was really unskillful. Something that happens, that having panic or something, or getting really angry when it wasn't helpful, or just things like that. And so, and that sounds like contradiction. But at the same time, it does feel like it's possible to know, like it is trustworthy. And I don't know, I was just curious what your thoughts were about that.
Well, your mind is never completely trustworthy. Because your mind, or these different parts of your mind, are generating the perceptions out of which you're constructing your reality and your sense of self. And they're doing that on the basis of all kinds of unconscious processes that are, so you can never completely trust it. But that's where a value system comes in so handy. Even something so simple as being able to discriminate the presence of desire and aversion. Can help you know when what your mind is presenting with you might be more trustworthy or less trustworthy than others. But there's also to continue on this theme of that there's I am really a committee, and when there's a really strong consensus, that's usually what you're going to end up going with anyway. And that's usually what we mean when we say you trust our mind, is that there's of the different aspects of what makes us up, when there's a strong consensus, then we have a lot of confidence. But it would be a mistake to ever trust that totally.
Because sometimes it just feels like there is like a direction of the mind or an inclination or something that you can distinguish and say, yeah, that's it. I don't know if that's a different way of saying it or if that's what that is. But
yeah.
But see, then how do you, because it's very dangerous to get into the second guessing state where you don't trust yourself and where you're really, that's just like, it's like this pitfall of anxiety and indecisiveness and inability to do anything because you're just always second guessing yourself.
Yeah, that is true. Actually, I'll just offer you something that might be helpful. When we find ourselves in a state of indecision, very often it's because it really doesn't matter that much. Is that not true? Think about it. But when it's the decisions that are hardest to make are the ones that, in the long run, it really doesn't matter that much. Which shade of pink should I paint my bedroom? Well, you can spend days worrying about that, hours looking at paint chips and everything else, and in the end, it really doesn't matter that much. But there are other times where what we're experiencing, our indecision, is a result of a conflict between two really strong impulses we have, and then it's important to see where they're coming from. Anger strongly justifies itself, and ill will and tendencies towards action that come out of that appear in our mind, as it's the only possible thing I could do or say, or the only reasonable thing, or of course I feel this way. I mean, it has the quality of self-justice. It's amazing to me when I look at my own mind and see the quality of self-justification that negative, aversive, ill will kinds of thoughts carry with them. And so if you find yourself in that, I'm going to go and tell them, I'm not going to take this anymore. And some other part of yourself is saying, look, why create any more trouble than there already is? And you're in that kind of thing, then you look at that and say, okay, what would the Buddha do? What would Buddha do? And see if you can help. What's that?
That'll straighten you right out.
It should at least help a lot. Would the Buddha go and tell him off? Yeah.
One very mundane question. When I sit cross-legged, for sure my leg's going to sleep. Am I better to just arrange myself somewhere where it's not going to go to sleep? Or should I work with the idea that somehow I'm going to get past that?
No, you should. The first step should be to try to find a way to sit that you're not going to have that problem, or at least that there's absolute minimum problem. You may find that there's no way you can sit that something doesn't fall asleep. So out of all of those, find the one that is going to be the least of a problem and the least distracting for you. Some people have things going on in their bodies such that they're never going to find a way that they can sit comfortably. But always find the place that's going to work best and then use that. And it's not about working through things or getting over things, except the things that there's no other alternative for. So
there's nothing magic in sitting cross-legged on a cushion.
No, as a matter of fact, it's depending on the health of your body and the condition of your musculoskeletal system. Sitting cross-legged has a lot of really definite advantages. Sitting in, if you're capable of sitting in a full lotus, that's a really stable position to sit in. But most people can't, and most people it would be a huge mistake to even try or to even think about it. Half lotus, that's not as good as full lotus, but that's pretty darn good. Simply sitting cross-legged, most people can do that, and that's really good. Can't do that, sit in a chair, or even sitting cross-legged. There's so many different ways of sitting cross-legged. Some people put supports under their knees. Some people use it's called a meditation band. It's just a strap that you put around your waist and it supports your knees. Different shapes of cushions. These C-shaped cushions versus the round ones. I always suggest that you experiment and you find the most comfortable way that you can sit and work with that. If as time goes by that you can move to a more stable position, then go ahead, but don't worry about it. It doesn't have to happen. It could even go the other way. You could start off as a meditator that has no problem sitting cross-legged, and then you develop sciatica and you just have to give it up and sit in a different way. That happens. Posture is a means to an end, and it's not an end in itself. It's just strictly a means to an end. Okay? After all this weeks of very getting into some of the more esoteric aspects of Buddhist doctrine, it's kind of nice to be talking about practice again. Yeah.
Well, I just was thinking once again. I think I have this thought very, very frequently, and perhaps we might all too. And the benefits of meditation for life and the kind of person that it helps us be in the world and the way that it helps us serve in the world, the kind of human being, our humanity, our ability to be compassionate and so on. would seem to me to be really what this is all about, in addition to perhaps the maybe the beginning to erode that rebirth cycle. I don't tend to think of that aspect of it. I just want to be a decent human being.
Yeah.
And so meditation, it seems to be the most marvelous way to go about that. So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about that and some of the benefits and so on and so forth.
That's a good topic to address. But, we'd like to live the best life that we can. And the way to do that is to try to do better than we have done in whatever way we can, day by day, step by step. And that keeps us always going in the right direction. And I'll point out that meditation by itself won't necessarily make someone a better person. The foundation for, in terms of becoming the best person that you can be, of becoming a Buddha, but we'll just assume for the moment that's the best person that you can be, okay? In terms of becoming a Buddha, meditation is one part. The other part is is what's called virtue, and the third part is called wisdom or understanding, and they all work together. But what they're all about is transforming the kind of person we are by transforming the mental formations, the karmic formations that make us up and make us be what we are. And it has as we do that, it has two results. It allows us to be more comfortable and happier in ourselves in whatever situation we find ourselves in. And it also causes us to behave, to interact with others, to be in the world in a much more positive and wholesome way. And these two are absolutely inseparable from each other. To practice virtue requires that you be aware of the non-virtuous activities of your mind and of your speech and of your bodily actions. And that is a big step. Most people, no matter what religious system that they choose to follow, it will involve some code of conduct, and the very first thing they'll discover is it's a whole lot easier to say you're going to follow this set of guidelines, precepts, commandments than it is to really do it. And the first step is you have to be aware when you're not doing it. This is one of the things that meditation contributes to. I mean, not the kind of meditation that you just get lost in a blissful state of concentration, but the kind of meditation where you're paying attention to your mind, you're getting used to paying attention to your mind, what's happening in your mind, the way your mind behaves, the way it reacts. This carries over, and it allows you to be much more aware of your conduct. But there's a limit to the value and effectiveness of just following rules for the sake of following rules, keeping commandments or precepts for the sake of keeping them. Because you can always be on guard to stop yourself from lying and stealing. But it would be better to remove from your mind stream those impulses that cause you to want to lie and steal. It would be better yet if you could replace them in your mind stream with impulses that would make you be more interested in sharing generosity, and protecting and preserving the property of others rather than just resisting the impulse to steal. And to be in a place of wanting to manifest loving kindness through helping other people rather than worrying about taking the blame off of yourself or being liked more or getting more of something because you can tell a good lie, and not lie. So it's that inner transformation of the roots of our behavior, and this is where this is where meditation and mindful awareness can really contribute to our ability to become a better person and make it possible. Because as you develop mindful awareness, you focus the mindful awareness on what's going on in your mind when the tendency arises to engage in unwholesome activities. And you don't even really need to do anything more than that, because that mindful awareness will not only notice those specific qualities of those activities that make them unwholesome, it will notice the unwholesome effects that it has on you and on other people, and at some deep level in your psyche that's not immediately visible, some switches will be flipped and some changes will be made, and you'll be some degree less likely to continue doing the same thing endlessly. It also feeds back into the meditation. At a certain stage of meditation, a person who goes around telling lies, confabulating stories, taking things from other people, doing things that are harmful in one way or another, making spiteful comments, all that stuff's in their mind. They know they did that. They're sitting there, here I am, trying to make my mind really still. Somewhere down below the surface where I can't see it, part of my mind is agitated due to the remorse for the things that I've done, due to the worry about if I'm going to get caught for this thing. I mean, if there's something you don't declare on your income taxes for a few years in a row, there is no way that that's not going to keep chewing away at you all of the time. If you purify the behavior in your life, you'll have a mind that can truly enter into a state of peace and calm without having this kind of agitating influences present. You can't sit there and say, okay, effortless concentration is going to cause spontaneous joy to arise in me, with a psyche that's full of all of these negative things, guilt and remorse and worry and desire for this and anger about that. Those things all have to be eliminated. So they work together. The meditation helps you to make the changes in your life and in your behavior. But if you don't make the changes in your life, your meditation is going to go just so far and no further. So they have to go together. And of course, wisdom, understanding, supports both of these in very powerful ways. So that's how these things work together. Now, I would like to see everyone that I talk to become a better, happier person. I'd be really pleased if that happens. And these tools that I offer you will work really well to do that. And I think some of you have already discovered that and are using them. And the more people that do, the better off everyone is. And if it never comes beyond that, if you become a generous, virtuous, patient person who is happier in life and in your relationships and can perform your duties and responsibilities with less resistance and more satisfaction, you'll have won in a big way. And of course there'll be all kinds of rewards that come back to you too, because that kind of person in the world is rewarded. So it is a real victory. If that were the only thing at all that you accomplished. The only problem with these kinds of transformations that we make in ourselves is that they are vulnerable to being lost. Of course, the greater the period of your life that you can spend having already succeeded in becoming a generous, virtuous, and patient person, then the more stable those tendencies are, and the less easily they are to become overwhelmed. But in the process, you'll have noticed that in the beginning they weren't very stable, and they could become overwhelmed by just the right circumstances. And as long as the roots exist for those kinds of unwholesome attitudes and behaviors, there's always the possibility that they will manifest again. So sort of the next step in becoming a better person, becoming the best person that you can be, is to begin uprooting completely, the factors in your mind that can lead you astray and can lead you to start going downhill again from what you've accomplished. And so that's what the higher stages of the path of training are about. And of course they bring with them the enormous satisfaction that comes from being a person who's not driven by desire and ill will, and who has the genuine sources for generosity and loving kindness in their mind and in their heart. And this is what comes from seeing even a brief glimpse of the most profound truths. Is it helps you get beyond this separation of I and other that gives rise to desire and ill will, and that stands in the way of generosity and loving kindness. And so when you cease to be entrapped by that ignorance, and that's what it is, the ignorance that makes us feel like we're separate and bound to behave in the service of this separate self. This is the ignorance that's the problem, and when you can see the more profound truth beyond that liberates you from that, then you truly become this other kind of person in a way that is not going to be shaken. It's not going to be undermined by circumstances. So, but I guess it's like the whole meditation process. You start where you are, and you just keep going in the right direction, and you can hopefully hold the goal of becoming an awakened being, becoming a Buddha in your own life, but without being attached to it in such a way that you're going to create frustration and disappointment for yourself. As long as you continue to move in that direction and become a better person, you're always winning. This I see that in this world that we live in, human life is such that there's suffering. There's no question about it. There's always going to be. It is ultimately unsatisfactory. It's imperfect. And that's the way it is. But there's so much. It's so much more so than it needs to be. And when I look around in the world and I see that it's more so than it needs to be because of all of the things that people do to each other, and I'm not just talking about war and exploitation and things like that. I mean all the little things that that married couples do to each other during the day, and the people that work together do to each other, and people that don't even know each other in traffic do to each other. I mean, we're always doing these things to each other that unnecessarily make things even worse than they have to be. And we do it out of desire and aversion. And it not only makes everybody else less happy, it makes us more unhappy ourselves too. So the solution is there, it's not that far away. So I really like to see a world where it gets to, the newest fad is to become generous, virtuous, and patient. And that's how we greet you. How are you doing today? Oh, great. I'm becoming more generous, virtuous, and patient all the time. Oh, me too. Great. Let me take care of this for you. Yeah. So the potential is there. The wonderful thing is that we're not the isolated, lonely, struggling, separate being that we think we are. And you have a universe to gain and nothing to lose except your sense of futility, alienation, and meaninglessness. So if you're willing to pay the price, anything else? It's starting to get late, but if anybody has any last questions or comments. I appreciated you bringing that up, though, because often, I want to see everybody achieve the ultimate goal, and maybe too often I address that without saying that, there's so much that you can do and that we can all do right now. It's not some pie in the sky thing in the future. Someday I'm going to be awakened and then everything will be changed. The change starts now, and that's what's most important. So thank you for reminding me to speak about that. Okay, well, if nobody has anything else, then and thank you all, and bid you good night, and until next time.